The rooster's crow broke the quiet of dawn, and sunlight filtered through the stained-glass windows of Castle Eldenhold. King Alaric stirred beneath heavy velvet covers as his chamberlain entered silently, bowing low before announcing the time. "It is the 6th hour, Your Majesty." Alaric sat up slowly. At 45 winters, he was no longer the fiery young prince who had ridden into battle with a gleaming sword. Yet his back remained straight, his eyes sharp. Servants dressed him in a finely embroidered tunic, the crest of the golden lion stitched over his heart. Once clothed and washed, he walked to the chapel for morning prayers. The castle priest waited, incense already burning. After prayers, a simple breakfast: warm bread, honey, salted ham, and a cup of spiced wine. Alaric sat with his advisors at the high table in the great hall, listening as news arrived from the outer reaches of the kingdom. There were reports of bandits near the western border and whispers of unrest among the lesser lords. The king rubbed his beard thoughtfully, then summoned his marshal to prepare scouts and write letters to the barons. Mid-morning was spent in the solar, where Alaric received petitions from subjects. A farmer knelt before him, begging for justice after a neighboring lord let his pigs trample the man's fields. A merchant requested permission to build a new stall in the capital's market. The king listened, weighed the words, and gave judgment with quiet firmness. By midday, Alaric retired to his private study with his scribe. There, he dictated correspondence, letters to allies, decrees for the realm, and messages to be carried by royal riders. Outside, the clanging of swords drifted in through the window, his sons and knights trained in the yard below. A feast was laid for lunch: roasted pheasant, boiled turnips, cheese, and dark bread. Alaric shared the table with his queen and visiting nobles. They spoke of politics, trade, and the harvest. Wine flowed freely, but the king drank modestly. In the afternoon, he held council in the war room. Maps were unrolled. Pieces carved from bone and wood marked enemy forces, strongholds, and roads. Alaric debated strategy with his commanders, always with one hand on his sword hilt, a silent reminder of the power he held and the battles he had won. As the sun dipped low, the king rode out with his retinue. A brief inspection of the outer village, a nod to the commoners who bowed as he passed. He waved to children who ran alongside the horses, their eyes wide with wonder. Evening brought vespers and a final meeting with his steward to review accounts, taxes, grain stores, and plans for the winter. Afterward, Alaric retired to the banquet hall where minstrels played and jesters entertained. He ate sparingly, laughing only once or twice. His mind was elsewhere, on the border troubles, the coming snows, and his legacy. At last, as night cloaked the realm in stars, King Alaric returned to his chambers. The fire was lit. His armor stood polished near the wall. He knelt once more to pray, then climbed into bed. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, he dreamed not of gold or glory, but of peace. The wind howled through the eastern courtyards of Castle Eldenhold, rattling iron sconces and slamming shutters against stone walls. Servants moved briskly, tightening windows and laying down rushes to soak up rain blown in through the cracks. In the upper halls, where the royal family lived, silence reigned like a cold judge, deep and watchful. In his war chamber, King Alaric stood alone, hands behind his back as he stared at the hearth. The flames danced low, licking at the blackened logs like whispering tongues. The letter from Queen Alenia's chamber lay folded beside a silver goblet on the table. The seal broken, the truth exposed. A bastard. It should have been a simple sin, long buried beneath years of duty. A single night of weakness during the early wars, when he was still a prince, and the kingdom's weight had not yet gripped his shoulders. The woman, Taina, a healer's daughter, had vanished soon after. He had ordered his steward to see to her needs, then dismissed the matter as men of his rank were taught to do. But now the Raven Prince lived. And someone new. The king turned as the heavy oak door creaked open. Princess Isolde entered, her boots damp from the garden paths. She did not ask permission, she never had. "You've been hiding things, father," she said, stepping close. "The court feels it," the servants whisper. Alaric looked into his daughter's eyes, so sharp they seemed to cut right through him. "The burden of kingship is the burden of silence," he said. "Some truths protect more when buried." "Not anymore," she replied. "Not when Westmere arms its soldiers and Ironfield builds new ships in secret. Not when there is a prince abroad with your blood." He sat, the lines on his face deepening. "Do you know what they would do to him if they caught him? A bastard with royal blood is a threat to every house. Every alliance, every claim. Isolde crossed her arms. Then why haven't you sent someone to protect him?" Alaric paused. "I did." In the south, the raven's wings. Rain lashed the rooftops of Dorneval. In a crooked tavern near the docks, the air was thick with pipe smoke and the smell of wet dogs. The Raven Prince sat in a corner booth, sharpening his sword with calm, methodical strokes. His eyes were shadowed beneath a hood, but his presence commanded attention like thunder on a clear day. Across from him sat a woman in crimson armor, her eyes glowing faintly from beneath her helm. "You're not like the others," she said, sipping from a metal flask. "You don't drink, you don't gamble, and you don't bleed when you're cut."
"Who taught you?"
The Raven looked up. "No one you'll ever meet again." She smiled. "Good. That means they're dead. Which makes you interesting." He set the whetstone down. "Why are you here?" he asked. She leaned forward, her voice low. "There are ships assembling in the Narrows. 3 banners. Black, silver, and one I've never seen. Cloaked in crimson with a broken crown. They're not merchants. They're not pilgrims. They're coming for Eldenhold," he said quietly. The woman nodded. "And you, boy. They're coming for you too." Back in Eldenhold, secrets beneath stone. Night fell heavy over Castle Eldenhold. Queen Elenia moved through the lower halls with her handmaidens, lanterns flickering in the gloom. She paused before a sealed door in the chapel crypt. A priest awaited her, robed in white and bearing a key forged from obsidian. "Does the king know you come?" he asked. "I am the queen," she said coolly. "He does not need to know." The door groaned open, revealing a spiral staircase descending into the earth. They went down, torches casting long shadows across the ancient walls. Below, in a chamber no servant had entered in generations, a book lay on an altar of black marble. Its cover was stitched from hide, and its pages glowed faintly. Elenia approached it with reverence. "I have kept your secrets," she whispered. "Now give me the truth. Give me the weapon." The book opened by itself. The next move. At dawn, banners were raised above the northern watchtowers. The sigil of Westmere, 3 red stars over a black field, fluttered beside the Lion of Eldenhold. A diplomatic visit, under guise of peace. King Alaric stood atop the battlements beside Lord Marshal Edrin, watching the riders approach. His breath steamed in the cold.
"Al."
The bells of Eldenhold tolled deep into the morning, echoing across the misted hills like the voice of an old god. In the capital below, market stalls stirred awake, and smoke began to rise from hearths and bakeries. But within the castle walls, no such peace reigned. The Hall of Mirrors, reserved for only the most delicate matters of state, had been shuttered for over a decade. Now its doors were opened again. The dust swept from silvered glass and velvet chairs as King Alaric summoned his inner council. He stood before a half-circle of nobles, his eyes hard and unflinching. To his right sat Princess Isolde, her back straight, armored not in steel but in sharp observation. "Lords of Eldenhold," Alaric said, "I called you here not for ceremony, but for truth." The gathered lords, grizzled warriors, silver-tongued barons, and merchants made noble by coin, shifted in discomfort. They had grown used to secrets. But now the king would give them none. Baron Westmere marches under false banners. Ironfield arms foreign mercenaries. There are spies within these walls and ships gathering in the south. If we stand divided, we fall. Then we fall, came a voice from the back. The speaker stepped forward, a young noble draped in fine silk, a smirk playing at his lips. "Lord Halric's heir, Cedric of Ironfield." "Forgive me, your majesty," Cedric said, bowing with just enough mockery to make the gesture insulting. But is this war council truly necessary? No army has crossed our borders. No blade has drawn blood. Perhaps the only enemy in Eldenhold is fear itself. Isolde rose from her seat before Alaric could respond. You are either a fool, she said coldly, or a traitor who thinks himself clever. The hall quieted. Cedric blinked, his smirk slipping just an inch. You've never fought, never starved, and never ruled. You wear your father's title like a child wears a crown of flowers. But know this, if Eldenhold falls, we will not fall quietly. I will make sure of it. Alaric watched the room as Isolde sat again. Several older lords exchanged glances, some nodding, others scowling. But all saw now. The girl was gone. A queen in the making had taken her place. Queen Alenia's pact. Beneath the castle, behind the chapel crypts, Queen Alenia walked a path lit by cold flame. The book she had opened whispered to her now, not with words, but with memories not her own. It showed her a time when kings bowed to the old ways, when gods still walked in human skin, and magic did not need permission. At the end of the path stood a mirror. Its frame was twisted black iron, and in its depths swam shadows and stars. From the reflection emerged a figure, not man, not beast. A thing once named, forgotten now by time and holy text. I seek your aid, Alenia said, her voice steady though her soul trembled. You seek a weapon, the being replied, voice like 1,000 whispers. But all weapons require a cost. My son may die. My daughter may burn. My husband may lose the throne. I will pay the cost. It leaned forward. Then give me your name. She hesitated. A name was power. A name was soul. A name was self. And then she gave it. Blood on the docks. In the storm-battered south, Dornevil's harbor stank of salt, oil, and fear. The Raven Prince moved through shadowed alleys, cloak soaked, boots silent. He was not alone. 2 men followed, mercenaries hired by someone who knew his true identity. They made their move in the fog. The first came from behind with a dagger, the second from the side with a club. But the Raven was already turning. Steel flashed. The dagger clattered to stone. The man holding the club screamed as it dropped from his shattered wrist. The Raven Prince stood over them, face hidden beneath his hood. Who sent you? The one who still breathed gasped. Ironfield. Lord Cedric. He fears your claim. A pause. Then the Raven drove his sword into the man's chest. Good, he whispered. He should. The Lion's Last Dance. That night, Castle Eldenhold blazed with candles and false cheer. A banquet was held in honor of the visiting nobles, spies and allies alike, seated side by side beneath painted ceilings and dangling banners. Alaric sat at the high table, Queen Alenia beside him, Isolde to his left. Laughter filled the hall, but beneath it ran a current of dread. He could feel it in his wine, in the flick of every servant's glance, in the polite applause after each toast. He stood. Tonight, we dine not for tradition nor pride, he said, voice clear across the hall. We dine because there is a storm upon us. We dine because we may not see another spring. Silence followed. Then, slowly, Lord Marshal Edrin rose. Then let us feast as lions, not lambs. The hall erupted in approval. But Alenia's eyes never left her husband.
She saw it before he did.
The cup. The wrong cup. Alaric drank, and then staggered. Poison. The wind outside Castle Eldenhold screamed like a mourning widow. Black clouds boiled above the city as thunder cracked over the mountains. Inside, the great bell tolled only once, low and long. The king was dying. He lay upon a bed of white linen, drenched in sweat, skin gray, and lips blackened by the poison that still ran through him. The best healers in the kingdom had come, muttering prayers and mixing potions, but none had succeeded. Not even the old monk from the Iron Abbey who had once revived a man frozen in snow for 3 days could break the poison's hold. At his bedside, Princess Isolde sat unmoving, her hand resting over her father's. His breathing was shallow, each gasp a struggle. She had not wept. Not yet. In the hall beyond, nobles waited like crows on a corpse. The council fractures. In the solar chamber, the air was thick with tension. The nobles sat around the map table, their voices rising with accusation and fear. "It was Ironfield," barked Lord Marshal Edrin. The boy Cedric feared the king's wrath. Cedric, standing with arms crossed, sneered. "A convenient accusation from the king's lapdog. Perhaps it was you, Edrin. You and your endless wars have drained the treasury. Poison saves coin, doesn't it?" Lady Rosewyn, the spy master, said nothing. Her fingers tapped lightly on the table's edge. Then Isolde entered. Her boots echoed on the stone as she stepped into the circle of flame-lit power. The lords looked up, some with annoyance, others with recognition. The girl was no longer a girl. She wore a black velvet tunic embroidered with gold thorns, her hair bound in a tight braid down her back, a sword at her hip. Not ceremonial. "My father still breathes," she said. "And until he does not, his crown remains upon his head. But hear me now, when the lion falls, I will not wait for your permission to wear it." A murmur rippled through the room. Lord Cedric snorted. "You are not the heir. Your brother." "My brother is 9 years old, and still plays with wooden soldiers. And should anything happen to him," she said coldly, "I would be next in line." "Unless your uncle claims it first," someone muttered. Isolde's gaze cut like steel. "Then he had better pray the poison doesn't reach his cup next." The Raven summons. Far in the wild south, where the seas crashed against jagged cliffs and fog rolled in like war, the Raven Prince stood atop a weathered tower of black stone. The keep had no name on maps, and no flags flew above it. It had been abandoned long ago, except by those who lived outside law and blood. He had received the Raven just before dusk. The parchment bore no crest, only a single line in the ancient royal cipher. "The lion falls. Come north. The blood is yours." He burned the letter after reading. Then he packed his blade and began the long ride north. Alenia's descent. Beneath Castle Eldenhold, Queen Alenia stood once more before the mirror of stars. The entity on the other side had no face now, only swirling mist and a voice like dead leaves. "You swore your name," it hissed. "Now the cost must be paid." Alenia bowed her head. "I gave you my name," she said. "Now give me the throne." The mirror shimmered. "Then remove the king." Alenia closed her eyes. "He is already dying." "No," the voice said. "Not by your hand. That is not the cost. You must finish it. Only then will power obey your will." A dagger appeared in the air before her, black as midnight, pulsing faintly with unseen runes. She took it. Nightfall. The sun had long since vanished behind dark clouds when Alenia entered the king's chamber. The guards bowed and left as instructed. Isolde had stepped away for only moments to speak with the steward. Alaric lay still, lips trembling, eyelids fluttering. He was dying but not dead. She knelt beside him. "My king," she whispered, "you were a good man, a stubborn man, a lion, but your time has ended, and the future needs something darker." She pressed the dagger to his chest and whispered his name, his true name, the one he had spoken only once to her on their wedding night. The blade slid into his heart like silk. Alaric's eyes opened, wide and clear. He saw her, and then he was gone. The Queen's decree. By morning, the black banners were raised above Eldenhold's towers. Bells rang not for war, but for mourning. The king was dead. Queen Alenia stood before the nobles in the Hall of Blades. At her side stood Isolde, her face pale and unreadable. The boy prince, Alaric's son, stood with his tutor, too young to understand. Alenia's voice rang out like a clarion. "The king is dead. Long live the queen regent. Until the boy is of age, I will govern in his name." Whispers rippled through the court, but none dared object. Not yet, because they had not seen the letter in Isolde's hand. A royal will, unseen, unread, signed by the king days before the banquet, naming his heir. Isolde of Eldenhold. The black banners still hung limp over Eldenhold's towers, soaked from 3 days of unrelenting rain. They fluttered not with pride, but with mourning. King Alaric the Lionheart was dead. Though his body was burned upon a pyre with all honors, flanked by stone lions and veiled queens, the flames rising like ancient judgment, no one in the kingdom truly believed he had died of natural cause. Not with the suddenness. Not with the whispers that followed. The embers had not even cooled before the court fractured, and in the shadows beyond the castle gates, old enemies stirred. Isolde's coronation delayed. The will of King Alaric had been found. It bore his signature and the seal of the royal signet, a lion crowned in flame. The document named Princess Isolde as heir, should the king die before the boy prince reached his 16th year. It should have been law, but Queen Olenna had moved faster. The boy, Prince Malric, had already been crowned under her regency. She held the nobles with promises of stability. She held the gold with control of the treasuries. And she held the silence of the court through quiet disappearances. 3 lords had vanished in 2 nights. One, a known supporter of Isolde, was found drowned in the castle well. The Raven Prince arrives. He came under storm clouds and thunder, cloaked in a woolen hood and riding a black stallion with no sigil. The guards did not know his face, but they did not stop him. Something in his gaze made their hands tremble on their spears. He rode through the gates and passed through the lower city in silence, the streets clearing as he went. Men muttered, women stared, and children whispered of ghosts returned to claim their name. At the outer hall, he dismounted. A squire rushed to take his horse. "Tell Princess Isolde," he said, "that the blood she calls for has returned." Whispers in the walls. Queen Olenna watched from a window in the high tower, her fingertips pressed against the glass.
"He has come," she said.
Lady Roswin, now dressed in robes of bone white and carrying a blade of foreign steel, nodded. "He bears your husband's eyes. And his temper." Olenna turned. Her face was pale, but her skin shimmered faintly now, something not entirely mortal anymore. "Then let us see if his blood is stronger than mine." A hidden meeting in the crypts. Isolde descended into the crypts where her father's ashes had been placed beneath the lion statue of the founding king. She lit no torch. She knew the way in darkness. She was not alone. The Raven Prince waited there, his sword leaned beside him, a flask in hand. "You came," she said. "You called," he replied. There was a long pause. Then she asked, "What name do you bear now?" He looked at her with those same eyes, steel gray, the mark of Alaric's line. "Names are chains. But in the south, they called me Kaelin." "Kaelin," she whispered. "Then you know who you are." "I know who I was denied the right to be." She stepped closer. "Then help me take it back." Their hands met, hers cold with fury, his warm from the long ride, and the old blood of Eldenhold stirred. The queen's magic spreads. Deep in her private sanctum, Queen Olenna knelt before the obsidian mirror. Her hair had turned white. Her eyes, once soft blue, now shimmered with molten silver. The creature on the other side of the mirror no longer whispered. It commanded. "You have bound the throne with death," it said. "Now bind the land. Make them yours." Olenna reached into a bowl of dark water and withdrew a blade not made by any forge. She turned it in her hand and smiled, lips curling at its pulse. "The trees will wither. The rivers will kneel. The people will forget who they were, until only I remain." Gathering the clans. Meanwhile, in the wild north, the clans of Northwood stirred for the first time in a generation. A messenger bearing Isolde's seal, a golden thorn over black, rode into the ancient ring fort of Dunvarn. There, beneath snow-covered pines, the chieftains gathered. Old warriors, wolf-skinned hunters, women with tattoos of oak leaves and serpent eyes. The messenger unfurled the scroll. "The lion is fallen. The crown is stolen. The north has slept too long. Let it rise once more, not for coin or faith, but for blood." The clans roared. And for the first time in 100 years, torches were lit at the edge of the frostwood. Queen versus heir. Isolde stood at the head of her father's war table. The Raven Prince at her side, Marshal Edrin grim-faced across from her, and Lady Roswin watching from the shadows, her loyalty unclear. "I will not be regent," Isolde said, her voice steady. "And I will not kneel to a usurper dressed in silk." Edrin frowned. "If you move against the queen now, the city will burn." "Then let it," Kaelin murmured. "No," Isolde said. "The city is my father's heart. I will not rule its ashes." She pointed to the map. "We strike the border forts first. Cut off the queen's support. Force the nobles to choose sides. One by one." Lady Roswin finally spoke. "And if they choose her?" Isolde looked her in the eye. "Then I will show them what a true heir does to traitors." The road from Eldenhold to the western marches wound like a scar through the highlands, where storm clouds clung to jagged peaks and the wind howled through mountain passes like mourning spirits. There, where the land narrowed and stone towers stood watchful against the sky, the first sparks of war ignited. The banner of House Thornwyn, a golden vine over blood-red field, had been raised in defiance of the crown. Lord Gareth Thornwyn, an old friend of King Alaric and a known supporter of Princess Isolde, had sealed the gates of Highwatch and refused to lower the banner of rebellion. Queen Elenia sent her answer not with messengers, but with fire. The Siege of Highwatch. It began at dusk. Queen Elenia's forces, 500 men in black and crimson livery, many with foreign faces and cruel iron armor, approached Highwatch under the sigil of peace. But there was no truce in their minds. The sky darkened, and the first unnatural storm rolled in. Lightning cracked without thunder. Horses reared. Torches blew out with no wind. And then came the whisper, unheard by any ear, but felt in the bones of every man on the walls. A spell had been cast, and the gate turned to ash. The queen's soldiers swarmed through like hornets. Fire spread across the keep. No oil, no spark, just fire born of shadow. Lord Thornwyn stood with sword drawn on the steps of the hall. He fell, stabbed not by a blade, but by a man whose eyes were black as pitch. By dawn, Highwatch was smoke and ruin. Only one message was left behind, carved in blood upon the stones. Kneel or burn. Isolde's awakening. Word reached Princess Isolde at the northern pass, where her small force of loyalists and Northwood clans trained by torchlight and thunder. She stood beneath a pine heavy with rain, her hand clenched around the scroll as she read the report aloud. "They burned the gates," she said. "Thornwyn's line is dead. No survivors. No prisoners." The Raven Prince stood at her side, silent. 100 torches flickered behind them, their flames fragile against the rain. "Elenia," he said finally, "is not just using magic. She is becoming something else." Isolde's voice was cold. She was always something else. Visions in the stone. That night, Isolde could not sleep. She wandered the ancient ruin at the edge of camp, stone circles older than even Eldenhold's founding. There, deep beneath the earth, lay the Hall of Stars, where the seers of old had once communed with forces lost to time. And there she met her fate. The hall opened for her, though none had spoken the words aloud.
The torches lit by themselves.
The air hummed with presence. At the center stood a pool of still water, black and mirror-like. She knelt, hands trembling, and gazed into its depths. A vision struck her like cold lightning. She saw Eldenhold in flames, her brother's corpse on the throne, her mother's eyes hollow and silver like moons, her own hands soaked in blood. The Raven Prince lay dying beside her, whispering a name she had never heard. And behind it all, a voice rose from the ruin. "Only one will wear the crown of ash." She gasped, fell back, and the vision shattered. The Queen of the Mirror. In the royal chapel, Queen Elenia stood before the Mirror of Stars. Her hair, now silver-white, flowed like liquid mercury. Her eyes glowed softly in the candlelight, and her hands trembled no longer. The mirror no longer reflected her. Instead, it obeyed her. She raised both palms. In the far north, a scout in Isolde's camp screamed as his heart froze in his chest. In the capital, an old noble fell down the steps of the tower, a whisper having pushed him in his final moment. And deep in the dungeons below the castle, Prince Malric, the boy king, began to cry in his sleep, unaware that his soul was slowly being leached, piece by piece. Alenia turned to Lady Rosewyn. "The time is near," she said. "Summon the eastern armies. When the moon is red, we march on the north." Plans of flame and stone. The next morning, Isolde stood before her captains, the Raven Prince beside her. Her face was pale, not from fear, but from the weight of what she now knew. "She has bound herself to the Mirror Folk," she said, "to powers older than law. If we let her march north, the land will not survive." A young captain spoke. "We are outnumbered, outmagicked. Even the Northwood clans fear her now." Isolde looked to the Raven Prince. "Then we give them a reason to fight." Kaelin, once a nameless exile, now her only equal, nodded. "We take the battle to her. But not with swords alone. There's something beneath the old ruins. A relic. A weapon forged before the first crown." Isolde's eyes narrowed. "Where?" "In the ruins of Duncairn," he said. "Buried with the first queen. And guarded by a curse." The wind in the north was different. It did not sing. It scraped. As Isolde and the Raven Prince climbed the moss-covered stair of the lost fortress of Duncairn, even the birds had gone silent. The trees stood still, not with peace, but with warning. The ruined keep emerged through the fog like the ribs of a long-dead god, towers broken open, gates rusted and half-buried, and statues worn down until their faces were no longer human. They had brought only 4 companions, 2 Northwood scouts, a mute priest of the Old Faith, and Marshal Idrin, who had once fought on these stones during the border wars of his youth. "What exactly are we looking for?" Idrin asked, brushing aside a vine thick as a wrist. Isolde answered quietly. "The first crown was forged here, but it was not made of gold." The stone below. The stairwell to the undercrypt was hidden beneath the shattered floor of the old chapel, just as the Raven Prince remembered from the stories passed to him by those exiled from the court. The descent was narrow and steep. The air stank of rot and copper. One of the scouts gagged but said nothing. The walls were carved with forgotten runes, their meanings lost even to the priest. At the bottom was a stone door, sealed shut with no handle, no lock. But as Isolde stepped forward, the runes lit with faint blue light. The stone moved. The door opened. They entered a chamber unlike any in Eldenhold. The Crown That Bleeds. It was a circular room, impossibly wide, its ceiling lost in shadow. In the center stood an altar of obsidian, and atop it rested a crown unlike any they had seen. It was not gold, but bone, woven from the spine of a single serpent-like creature, crowned with broken rubies that pulsed like slow heartbeats. Around it, the air shimmered with heat and cold at once. Idrin stepped forward and faltered. "That thing is alive." The mute priest knelt beside the altar and touched the floor. When he looked up, his eyes were bleeding. "The first queen forged it," the Raven said. "Not to rule, but to contain something."
A god.
"Or perhaps a piece of one." Isolde stepped forward. "Then we need it," she whispered. As she reached for the crown, a voice filled the chamber, not from any throat, but from the stone itself. "Who seeks the crown of chains?" The torches went out. The ground trembled, and the shadows rose. Trial of the First Queen. From the walls, 3 figures stepped forth, not men, but echoes. Cloaked in spectral robes, with masks of gold, they spoke in a voice made of wind and flame. She who claims the crown must prove she is not broken, not ruled by vengeance, not made hollow by grief. Isolde stood firm. "I have lost a father, a kingdom, and a future. I will not lose what remains." The Raven Prince placed a hand on her shoulder. "They demand a trial." Idrin stepped forward. "If they want blood, take mine." But the spirits ignored him. A ring of fire encircled Isolde and the Raven Prince, and a vision swallowed them whole. Visions of the fall. Isolde saw a future, twisted and cruel. She sat upon the throne, her dress soaked in blood. Her people starved. The city burned. Her brother's bones lay beneath the throne, and the Raven Prince knelt before her in chains, whispering her name before she slit his throat. She gasped, "I would never." All rulers say that. The spirits boomed. Then the Raven saw his own truth. He was crowned king, but none knelt. The people spat his name. He had slain Alenia, yes, but also Isolde, the child king too. He had won, but inherited ashes. He dropped to his knees. "I did not ask for a crown, yet still you want it."
Then silence.
A single voice whispered from the flame, "You may wear the crown, but it will take more than it gives." The crown is claimed. The flames died. The stone steadied. The spirits bowed their heads and faded into dust. The crown sat still upon the altar. Isolde stepped forward. Her hand trembled, but she did not hesitate. She lifted the crown of chains, and the room filled with a deep, thunderous beat. Not from outside. From within the crown itself. It recognized her, not as queen, but as keeper. The Raven Prince watched her, eyes unreadable. And in that moment, something passed between them. Not love, not fear.
Oath.
Meanwhile, the queen's offering. In the deepest chamber of the castle, beneath Eldenhold's crypts, Queen Alenia stood before a circle drawn in blood and ash. Before her lay her son, Malric, the boy king, pale, unconscious, his breath shallow. Lady Rosewyn hesitated at the edge of the circle. "This is no longer rule, my queen. This is something else." Alenia's eyes blazed silver. "This is the future." She raised the black dagger she had used to end Alaric's life, and drove it into her own hand. The blood struck the circle. The chamber screamed, and something ancient answered. The Vale of Harrowfen was once farmland, rolling hills, quiet streams, and villages where the name of the crown was spoken with reverence. Now it was a graveyard in waiting. On one side of the valley, Isolde's banner flew, silver thorns on a field of midnight blue. Her forces were a patchwork of loyalists, mountain clans, rebel knights, and southern Sellblades who followed only coin. Opposite them, on the far ridge, stood Queen Alenia's host, iron-disciplined, heavily armored, and twisted by dark whispers. Their banners no longer bore the old royal seal, but instead a crescent mirror over black sun. Between them lay the last breath of peace. The crown's return. When Isolde rode into camp, the air shifted. The men, hardened by war and loss, bowed in silence, not to a princess, but to something else. The crown of chains rested in a velvet-lined chest, pulsing faintly with unnatural heat. Marshal Edrin fell to one knee. "It recognizes you." Isolde's gaze was distant.
"No. It remembers me."
The Raven Prince stood at her side, still cloaked, eyes scanning the distant ridgeline where the queen's army massed like a rising tide. His face was unreadable, but his voice was cold. "She will not wait long." Isolde nodded. "Then neither shall we." The Battle of Harrowfen. At dawn, the fog rolled in thick as wool. From the queen's ranks came a sound like no trumpet ever blown, deep, warping, and hollow. Then came the charge. Alenia's vanguard surged down the hill, blades drawn, eyes glowing faintly in the mist. Among them were mirror-born, twisted soldiers bound by magic, whose wounds did not bleed but smoked. Isolde gave the signal. Horns blasted. Arrows flew. The valley exploded into chaos. Marshal Edrin led the front line, cutting down 2 mirror-born before falling back with a gash across his chest. Northwood archers loosed fire-tipped shafts, lighting the wet grass ablaze, driving gaps into the queen's advance. And above it all, Isolde rode in silver steel, sword drawn, the crown of chains pulsing on her brow. As she passed, men stood taller. Arrows flew straighter. Fear turned to fury. She had become something more than air. She had become a symbol. blood on the mirror. But Alenia had planned for more than brute force. From the rear of her host, she stepped forward in robes of deep crimson, her face painted with ancient sigils. The Mirror of Stars, a shard of the original mirror god's prison, hung around her neck, and in her hands, a book bound in human skin. She whispered words no human tongue was meant to know. The ground split, and a gate opened. From it crawled things without names, shadows with teeth, armor with no bodies inside, voices that spoke backward and caused men to go mad. The battlefield buckled as her magic bent the very laws of nature. Isolde faltered. The Raven Prince stood between her and the advancing dark. "Now," he said. He reached into his cloak and pulled a thorn-wrapped horn, the last gift of the Dun-Caran spirits. He blew once, and the earth answered. The giants wake. From the northern ridge, stones the size of towers began to move. The last giants of Caranmore, bound in slumber for centuries, had been waiting for the horn. Their skin was bark. Their eyes glowed like starlight. They stepped onto the battlefield with thunderous rage. The queen's mirror-born shattered beneath their fists. Her summoned beasts turned and fled. Her soldiers screamed as the veil was torn apart by titanic footsteps and crashing limbs. For the first time since the war began, Alenia stepped back. The shattering. But Alenia did not flee. Instead, she opened the Mirror of Stars, holding it aloft. From it poured a light too bright to bear, and a shadow darker than death. The two forces collided in the air over Harrowfen Vale, Isolde's crown against Alenia's mirror, ancient powers awakening from opposite ends of time. The blast was deafening. The valley cracked open. The armies were thrown apart like leaves in a storm. When the dust settled, the queen was gone. The Raven Prince lay unconscious, a deep cut across his temple. Isolde stood alone at the center of the shattered field, her hair glowing faintly with pale light, her eyes no longer wholly her own. And above her floated the crown of chains, no longer just an artifact, but now alive with flame and memory. Aftermath, the broken and the bound. 3 days later, the survivors regrouped. Idrin, broken but breathing, reported to Isolde in a ruined farmhouse turned command post. "Your mother has retreated south, to the Tower of Glass." Isolde, wrapped in dark furs, stared into the fire. "She's going there to finish it." The Raven Prince sat nearby, nursing his wounds. "She'll summon the mirror god itself." "She'll try," Isolde said. "But we'll get there first." Meanwhile, in the Tower of Glass, Alenia stood before an obsidian altar. She held a dagger soaked in her own son's blood. Above her, the sky darkened, and the stars blinked out. She chanted, and in the void beyond the mirror, something began to stir. A voice older than time. "You have fed me well. Now break the world." Alenia smiled through her tears. "Gladly." The tower rose from the earth like a shard of the moon, jagged and pale, reaching toward a sunless sky. No bird circled it. No wind dared to whistle past its eaves. Built by ancient hands long before Eldenhold had a name, it had no door, only a mirrored arch that pulsed with a cold light, as though it breathed. From within, Queen Alenia watched. Her son, the boy king, Malric, lay sleeping beneath a veil of silver threads. His breath was shallow. Around him danced candle flames that did not flicker, suspended in air as if time had paused. She turned to the altar. The Mirror of Stars pulsed in her hands. It had given her power, but it wanted more. It whispered now, not in words, but in memories not her own. Whole histories flooding into her mind. Wars fought before fire was named.
Gods torn from sky.
And one, above all, the unseen king, sealed beyond mirrors. She would break the last seal today, but not before her daughter arrived. Not before the final choice was offered. The March of Thorns. Isolde rode at the head of her army. Her banner, a silver thorn on midnight, was carried beside the Raven Prince's black wing sigil. Giants walked at the rear, solemn and slow, whispering songs of old. The mountain clans marched beside Northwood riders, and even the mercenaries of Dorneval, once faithless, now sang her name. They called her the Chain-Bearer. The crown of chains floated behind her, never touching her brow, but bound to her by oath and magic. Each step she took, the land grew quieter. Even nature bent to her. "Do you feel it?" she asked the raven.
He nodded.
"The world knows. This is the end of something." They passed through the ruins of villages abandoned in the Queen's Purge. Fields salted, wells poisoned, statues defaced. On a shattered temple wall, someone had painted in blood, "The gods have returned." Isolde looked away. Not gods. Choices. The betrayer returns. 2 nights before reaching the tower, a rider came under flag of peace. He was cloaked, hunched, and smelled of grave soil. But when he removed his hood, Marshal Edrin drew his sword. It was High Lord Valar, once Alaric's closest advisor, long thought dead. "Before you kill me," Valar said, "know that I bring a truth the Queen has buried." Isolde lowered Edrin's blade. Valar's voice trembled. "Your father had a pact, one he kept even from the council. The Raven Prince is not his only bastard, nor his last." She narrowed her eyes. "There is another?" Valar nodded. "Not born of woman, not raised in shadows, but crafted, in glass, by the Queen's own hand." "Malric," the raven whispered. Valar looked up. "The boy king is not Alaric's heir. He is a construct, a vessel. He was never meant to rule, only to hold the god's heart." The tower's gate. At sunrise, they reached the tower. The army halted. No siege engines could crack its walls. No ladders could scale it. Only Isolde, the Raven Prince, and Valar entered. The crown of chains opened the mirrored gate with a pulse of heat and shadow. Inside, time twisted. Hallways curled like serpent spines. Mirrors reflected not the present, but regrets. Isolde's dead brother, the Raven's lost mother, Alenia's first kiss with Alaric, long before the crown. They walked in silence. Then came the mirror stairs, a spiral that reached toward the sky. At the top, a single door. Isolde knocked. It opened. The final parley. The chamber was still. Queen Alenia stood beside Malric's floating form, cloaked in scarlet, her face lined with fatigue and fire. "You came," she said softly. "I had to," Isolde replied. "You're still my mother. And you're still my mistake." The Raven Prince stepped forward. "Is it true? The boy is not your son." Alenia smiled sadly. "I bore a child once. He died in my arms at birth. Alaric grieved for a week, then returned to war. But I remembered." She placed a hand over Malric's chest. "I found the mirror. I made a vessel, and the god entered." "Why?" Isolde whispered. "Why betray everything for this?" Alenia's voice cracked. "Because no throne lasts. But a god can rewrite the world. And I will not leave it in ashes for men like Valar. Or your father." She raised the mirror.
"Come.
"Kneel, and you may rule beside me." Isolde looked at the raven, then at the boy, and she said,
"No."
"Chains and mirrors." Alenia screamed. The mirror of stars burst open. From it surged the god's form, tall as sky, faceless, veiled in glass and light. But Isolde stood firm. The crown of chains rose. And for a moment, the old magics, containment and creation, clashed in silence. Then, the tower cracked. Mirrors shattered. And the boy, Malric, opened his eyes. But they were not his eyes. They were older than the sun. The god had awakened, and all the world would feel its gaze. The tower of glass was dying. Cracks webbed through its mirrored halls like veins of light, pulsing with unstable magic. The air trembled. The sky above churned in colors not known to man, black and violet, bleeding silver. And at its heart stood a boy, or what had once been a boy. Malric, the false heir, had become something else. His flesh flickered, phasing between solid and starlight. His voice echoed in many tongues at once. The unseen king, The god trapped beyond all reflections had found its vessel, and the world would reflect it. The breaking of Alenia. Queen Alenia knelt before her creation, blood trailing from her mouth, her left arm broken. The mirror of stars, now blackened, lay in shards across the floor. She had summoned a god, and lost control the moment its will awoke. Mother, the thing that wore Malric's shape, spoke. Not with cruelty. With indifference. You gave me form, but not purpose. Shall I burn your world, or fold it into dream? Alenia whispered, spare them. The god turned its 1,000 eyes upon her. They spared nothing. And it raised its hand. But the strike did not fall, because Isolde stepped between them. The crown and the god. She stood, battered, her silver armor cracked, the crown of chains floating above her like a storm halo. The magic of the first makers pulsed from her, ancient and binding. You will not pass, she said. The god paused. You are flesh, it said, yet shaped like the one who bound me. A daughter of order. You are the chains. I do, Isolde said. And I remember why they were forged. She reached out her hand, and the crown responded. The chains snapped downward, glowing with runes. The god reeled, its form resisting but not immune. The Raven Prince joined her, his cloak torn, blood on his temple. Can it be bound again? He asked. Isolde didn't answer, because in her mind, she heard her father's voice. Some things are not meant to be caged, only chosen. The god's choice. The tower floor split open beneath them. The god lifted one arm, and visions spilled across the room. A world without death, but frozen in time. A kingdom where all obey, yet none feel. A future where Isolde sits on the throne forever, unaging, unloved, unfree. You may bind me, the god said, but you will become me. The crown does not chain alone. It transforms. The Raven Prince stepped forward. Then I'll take it. Isolde looked at him. He smiled, sad, brave. This was never your curse to bear. Let it be mine. But the crown did not move. It hovered, then lowered onto Isolde's head. And everything stopped. The moment beyond time. The world around her fell away. She stood on a vast mirrored plain. No sky, no sun, just infinite reflection. Before her, a woman of thorns, ageless and dark-eyed. The first binder. The one who had first tamed the unseen king.
Isolde, she said.
Do you know why you were chosen?
No.
You loved, the woman said. Even when it cost you. That is what the god never understood. Power is not purpose. Sacrifice is. Then she placed a single thorn on Isolde's heart. You will not live long, she said, but you will bind well. The fall of the god. Back in the tower, time snapped back into place. The god howled, collapsing in on itself. The chains erupted from Isolde's crown, wrapping the boy thing in coils of memory, light and law. Alenia screamed, but not in anger. In grief. Malric. The Raven Prince caught her as she fell. The god's form shrank, pulled into a mirror-shaped prison, which sealed shut with a sound like final breath. Isolde collapsed to her knees. The crown of chains cracked, and the tower of glass began to fall. Eldenhold rises. They fled as the tower crumbled, dragging Alenia and the shattered crown with them. Outside, the armies waited, silent, watching. Isolde emerged in torn armor, the Raven Prince beside her, and raised the shattered crown high. The god is bound, she said. The line is broken. But Eldenhold remains. The soldiers knelt. For the first time, not to a king, but to a queen. Epilogue. The Winter Throne. Weeks later, in the Hall of Thorns, Isolde was crowned Queen of Eldenhold beneath the Watcher Tree. Alenia was not executed. She was exiled, given a ship, a single crew, and sent west into the mist, never to return. The mirror prison was sealed beneath the earth. The Raven Prince stayed, though he refused any title, choosing instead to guard the crown's fragments in the sacred vault. Peace returned, but it was a wary peace. The sky still flickered on cold nights. The stars seemed closer now. And sometimes, in the deepest mirrors of the castle, the boy's eyes looked back. The sky was the color of a dying fire. Queen Alenia stood on the deck of a black-sailed ship as it cut through the mists of the western expanse, a realm untouched by maps and ruled by silence. Behind her, the kingdom she had tried to shape by mirror and magic was lost, its throne now held by her daughter, Isolde. Her son, Monarch, was no more. Only the god's whisper remained in the back of her mind, faint as breath on glass. The sea was different here. It did not churn or swell. It pulsed, slow and living, as if the ship floated across the skin of some vast sleeping beast. Her crew spoke little. They were not men of Eldenhold, but quiet-eyed exiles, branded and mute, gifted to her by unknown patrons for this voyage. She did not ask where they came from. She knew the answer would come soon enough. And on the 12th day, it did. A spire broke the mist, jagged and silver-blue, like the tower of glass, but older, colder. It rose from the center of a black island shaped like a shattered crown.
She had found it at last.
The Throne of Ashes. Chapter 2. The Queen Below. The island was dead. No birds. No wind. Only dust and bones carved into the ruins of a forgotten city. Alenia moved through it with purpose, following visions the god had given her long ago, before it was bound in Malric's body, before Isolde's rebellion. Beneath the temple at the island's heart, she descended into the dark. And there she found it, a mirror that did not reflect. Instead of her face, it showed another world, one where the stars bled red and mountains walked like beasts. A world before this one, before the chains, before the gods were bound. A voice whispered from beyond the glass. You are not her, but you are enough. The mirror cracked, and Alenia stepped through. Chapter 3. The Shadows Stir. Back in Eldenhold, Queen Isolde sat upon the thorn throne, her hand wrapped around a scroll bearing a blood seal. Reports from the western watchtowers. Whispers of storms that moved against the wind. Dead whales washing up on silver shores with symbols carved into their bones. The Raven Prince entered. You felt it too? He asked. She nodded. Something crossed the sea. Not something, he said. Someone. He placed a shard of glass upon her table. It shimmered with energy, and when she touched it, she saw her mother's face, smiling. Chapter 4. The Temple of Teeth. Alenia awoke in a world not born of time. She stood upon glass fields that stretched into the sky. Creatures watched her, tall, faceless, dressed in robes made of moonlight. The Queen of Eldenhold. They did not speak. Each night, they remembered her. She walked the hall of chains. They showed her visions. Her footsteps echoing against stone laid, a crown buried in flame, turned to dust. Her daughter, her guards burning like a star from the shadows, becoming something no throne could hold. Even the Raven Prince, and then they offered her ever watchful, a second god. They whispered. Since the mirror shard had that shown sleeps beneath the bone tree, Isolde had changed. Alenia did not hesitate. Sharper. She took the blade they offered. Her voice more command than request. Time. She was a ruler forged by grief. She would return by war. And this time, even she would not ignore the kingdoms. She would rebuild in the world. The dreams of fire beneath her feet, blood in the north, and the rumors, far from the capital, a hidden chamber beneath the thorn throne itself. Snow fell too early, night of the lunar silence, howled in tongues forgotten. She summoned her old boy tutor, named Kale, Magister Howell, born with a mirror-shaped scar over his heart, proclaiming the palace was fire and living stone and the sea. He stood before her now, an old woman with iron eyes, his hands shaking as he unrolled ancient blueprints. A herald of what? Yes, your majesty, she whispered. Of the queen who will burn the world to save the throne. Sealed by your grandfather, buried so deeply that even your father feared to speak of it. She looked down at the page. The shape beneath the throne was not a room. It was a mirror, 10 times larger than any they had known. Chapter 7. The Mirror Tomb. By torchlight and silence, Isolde, the Raven Prince, and Howin descended through a spiral shaft carved behind the Hall of Thorns. Each step downward made the air colder, thicker, as if the world itself resisted their approach. No soldiers accompanied them. Only one bearer of the crown's flame, an artifact used to detect forgotten magics. It flickered and hissed as they reached the final stair. Before them stood a sealed gate. No door, no hinges. Just a wall of glass, black and blood-veined. Isolde placed her hand upon it. The mirror pulsed and opened. Inside was a vast circular chamber, hollow and cold. At its center, a dais of obsidian, and upon it, a body, cloaked in robes of midnight and ash. Not asleep, not breathing, but dreaming. The Raven Prince stepped forward. "What is it?" Halwyn fell to his knees. "It's the first god," he whispered. "The one before chains, before law, before light." Isolde looked upon the figure, and it opened its eyes. Chapter 8. The God Who Remembers. The being on the dais sat upright without sound. Its face was shifting, 100 features across 1,000 lifetimes. Man, woman, child, beast. It spoke not with voice, but with memory. They saw the building of Eldenhold in a time before men. They saw the chaining of gods by the first crown-bearer. They saw Elenia, alone on the sea, entering the Temple of Teeth and kneeling before the Thornmaker, a god even this one had feared. And then it spoke aloud. "You wear the chains, Queen of Dust." Isolde met its gaze. "And I'll break them, if I must." It tilted its head. "The crown is cracked. The god in glass stirs again. But I am not your enemy. I am your proof." "Of what?" she asked. "That your kind was made by gods," it said. "And now you have begun to unmake them." Chapter 9. The Thornmaker's Return. Far across the sea, beneath a moonless sky, Elenia stepped onto the shores of Eldenhold again, though not as the woman she once was. Her ship burned behind her, the silent crew consumed in white fire. She wore a crown of teeth, shaped like thorns, bone-white and humming with life. And the sword in her hand was older than speech, a blade called Remembrance, forged from the breath of the dying world before this one. She did not speak to the soldiers who confronted her on the beach. She raised her hand, and the sea swallowed them whole. Chapter 10. Seeds of Ruin. Back in the throne room, Isolde rose from the mirror chamber, changed. The God Who Remembers, Kareth it called itself, had not threatened her, but it had shown her a choice. "You will face the Thornmaker," it had whispered. "Your blood against hers. Mother and daughter. Mirror and chain. Only one may bind the future." The Raven Prince stood beside her, his face pale. "What now?" he asked. Isolde looked out the window. Black sails bloomed on the horizon, and in her mind, she heard her mother's voice again. "You thought I sought to rule, child. I sought to rewrite. The night Alenia entered the Chapel of Thorns, the city trembled. The ritual could not be done in silence. It required screams, the echo of all who bore her name in other realms, bound by broken mirrors and blood. The chapel stood in the heart of the Ash Court, a ruin she had burned clean with divine flame just days before. Now it bloomed with unnatural growth, glass roses on black vines, pulsing with heat. The altar was shaped like a mirror, cracked and humming. She stepped barefoot upon it, robes torn from the sea voyage, her crown of teeth resting on her shoulder. The boy beside her, Monarch, reborn, watched in silence, his silver eyes unblinking. He was not truly her son. He was a reflected soul, torn from the mirror's final breath. But in him lived every version of the child she had borne, buried, burned, and lost. And now, she would be whole again. She raised remembrance, the sword of frozen time, and plunged it into the altar. The world cracked. Chapter 18. The Other Alenias. The first to appear was the Queen of Salt, from the world where Alenia had drowned in the sea of whispers, but risen again, salt-blooded and crowned in coral. Then came the Crimson Empress, who had burned Eldenhold to ash 2 centuries earlier in a world made entirely of twilight. Then the Weeping Nun, who had refused to be queen, fled the throne, and lived in penance, giving birth to a kingdom of silence. One by one, they stepped through the rift, each one a version of herself, and yet not. Some bore kindness, others bore wrath, but all remembered, and they all spoke in unison. You seek unity. You seek godhood. But to merge is to kill. Which of us will you unmake? Alenia smiled. All of you, and none of you. I will make something new. Chapter 19. The War Within. The ritual was not simple. Each Alenia resisted. They fought not with blades, but with memories. The Weeping Nun poured into her the grief of 10,000 children lost. The Crimson Empress showed her the cities she had burned and the empires she had crushed beneath her heel. The Queen of Salt whispered secrets, names of men Alenia had loved and murdered in lives she never lived. Alenia bled, not from her skin but from her soul. Her body cracked with fractures of light, but she did not fall.
She stood.
And one by one, she drew them into herself, each version merging with the next, becoming less distinct, less separate, until only one Alenia remained.
Crowned in fire.
Clothed in memory, eyes like shattered stars. The Eternal Thorn. Chapter 20. The Bell of Shattered Time. Far above, in Eldenhold's heart, a bell rang that had not sounded in 1,000 years. The bell of shattered time, forged by the gods themselves, rang thrice. Once for a soul made whole, once for a fate rewritten, and once for the death of time. Isolde, standing in the city's highest spire, felt the sound pass through her chest like a sword. Vaelreth staggered beside her, blood at the corners of his mouth. She's done it. She's merged. Isolde whispered.
No, he said.
She's become more than herself. Kareth, the god of memory within her, trembled for the first time. We are no longer the oldest thing, it said. Chapter 21. The Girl with No Face. Amidst the chaos, the mirror shards scattered across the realm had begun to react. In the village of Dunrow, a small child with no face rose from a pond. In Silverglen, a merchant saw his own reflection step from the glass, take his wife's hand, and vanish into the mist. In the Tower of Stars, the scholars wept as their great lens shattered and revealed a single word etched across the stars, Alenia. And in a forgotten cell beneath the city, Kale, the northern boy, bearer of the mirror scar, fell into a trance. He spoke words not in his voice. The thorns are everywhere now. There is no glass, only her. All paths return to the Queen. Chapter 22. The First Queen and the Last One. Alenia stood upon a mountain of ash, her new body glowing with light and shadow. Her voice echoed across all worlds. I have broken the wheel. I have folded the mirrors. I am not the queen you knew. I am the first queen reborn. I am the last queen you will ever know. Armies knelt without knowing why. God screamed in silence. And far away, in a pocket of glass untouched by her will, Isolde stood defiant. She held a mirror shard that pulsed with power, one piece Alenia had missed. She looked into it, and saw a world where Alenia never lived. She whispered, "Then I will make this world real," and shattered it in her hand. The world had changed. Where once glass caught reflections, now it caught her. Alenia, eternal thorn. Her face stared back from every polished shield, quiet stream, and dying soldier's eyes. And yet, in a chamber deep below the citadel of Eldenhold, one shard had been spared. Isolde stood in a circle of salt and broken promises, the shard of negation clenched in her bloodied hand. The air around her shimmered like glass on fire. At her side knelt Cale, barely breathing, his mirror scar glowing faintly. He had seen too many worlds too quickly. The visions had cracked something inside him. Isolde did not cry. There was no time for tears. Only war. She stepped into the circle and spoke the words not heard since the sundering of the first flame. By the crown unmade. By the name I refuse. I reject the unity. I reject the god. I reject her. The shard in her hand screamed. Chapter 24. The splintering begins. From the edge of the world to the core beneath the throne, something ancient stirred. Not a god, not a soul, but a force older than both. The Worldbreaker, born not of malice, but of contradiction. A concept that refused all absolutes. It poured from the broken shard in Isolde's hand like smoke and thunder, wrapping around her like a cloak. A voice rose from it. Neither male nor female. Neither loud nor soft. You dare to divide. Isolde stood firm.
No.
I dare to choose. And with that, she drove the shard into her own chest. The mirror did not pierce skin. It pierced reality. And Isolde fell into the rift. Chapter 25. The Unworld.
She awoke in a place that had no time.
No stars. No Alenia. The Unworld was not absence. It was everything Alenia had rejected. Forgotten gods walked here, broken and faceless. Unlived lives floated in the air like mist. And at the center of it all stood a tree made of bones, its branches dripping with neverborns, souls that had been erased from the eternal thorns world. Isolde climbed it. Each branch whispered things no mortal should hear. Each step risked unmaking. But at the top, she found what she had come for. A version of herself, young, hopeful, unbroken, sitting beneath a sky that had never been named. The girl looked up. Are you me? She asked. Isolde knelt beside her. I was. Do you regret it? Isolde didn't answer. Instead, she handed the girl the last piece of the broken shard. Hide this, she said. When the thorns come, remember who you are. Chapter 26. Alenia's Dream Fractures. Back in the world she had claimed, Alenia froze. She stood atop her obsidian spire, surrounded by countless versions of herself, merged, mastered, and bowed to her will. And yet, a tremor passed through the sky. Something had left her dominion. She turned, eyes narrowing. One mirror, just one, no longer reflected her. Impossible, she said aloud. The Crimson Empress within her stirred. The Queen of Ash has rejected you.
She is one shard.
I am all. The weeping nun whispered, but sometimes all is too much. And for the first time, Alenia felt fear, not for her life, but for her truth. Chapter 27. The Child of the Fold. In the ruins of Eldenhold's eastern district, where glass trees now bloomed and citizens wept mirrored tears, Malric wandered. The boy was not truly a child. He was all the Malrics merged and refined. He knew every death he had died. Every mother he had called Alenia. But something called to him now. A voice older than her. A warmth other. He found Cale's discarded map, now changed. It showed a way out. A door not made of glass, but of wood. Living wood. He touched it. And whispered, Isolde. Chapter 28. The Thorn Splits. The eternal thorn stood before her army, her hand raised, her voice echoing through the minds of millions. This world is one. There are no others. There is only the queen. But a single voice pierced the chorus. Kale, still bleeding from the mind, stepped into the plaza. He held the mirror shard. Liar.
The people gasped.
Their faces began to shift, from perfect reflections to forgotten selves. The unity frayed. The merged Alenias began to murmur. The Crimson Empress pulled away. The weeping nun wept anew. And the Queen of Salt laughed. Alenia screamed. And oh! But the damage was done. She began to split. And Isolde returned. Alenia fled inward. Not across lands, nor through shattered mirrors, but into the core of her own creation, the inner garden, a realm she had crafted from memory and will, a sanctuary built inside her merged soul. Here, every version of herself was meant to live in peace, bound by her control, silent in obedience. But now they stirred. The Queen of Salt no longer walked the coral paths in silence. She stalked the edges of the memory sea with a dagger made of frozen tide. The weeping nun had taken a blade to her tongue and scrawled prayers in her own blood across the chapel walls. The Crimson Empress had lit the rose gardens aflame and sung war hymns as they burned. Alenia entered barefoot, her robes trailing gold and shadow, and the moment her foot touched the grass, it withered. The garden rejected her, because it no longer believed she was one. Chapter 30. Trial of the First Self. At the heart of the garden stood a mirror, not made of glass, but of bone and memory, carved from the ribs of forgotten gods. Alenia approached it, and within its surface stood not a queen, not a god, not a warrior, but a girl. No older than 17, her hair tangled, her eyes wide, her dress stained with soil. The first Alenia, the girl before ambition, before crown, before flame. She spoke gently. Do you remember me? Alenia, proud and burning, said nothing. The girl smiled. It was a broken, sad smile. You were me once. Before you lied. Before you took the thorns and said, this pain will make me queen. Alenia's jaw clenched. I did what was needed. The girl touched the mirror's edge. You did what made you alone. And with that, the mirror shattered. Not from force, but from forgiveness. Chapter 31. Collapse. The mirror's breaking triggered a storm inside her. Not of wind or rain, but of memory. Each self she had bound, each soul she had folded into her form, now began to pull away, screaming in their own voices. I was a mother. I was a martyr. I was no one. I was loved. I died for you. You erased me. The storm tore through the inner garden. Thorns turned to ash. Trees withered and bled ink. The sky split open, revealing a vast, echoing nothingness beyond. Alenia fell to her knees. Her crown cracked. Her body began to splinter. Chapter 32. The Last Self. In the stillness after the storm, only one voice remained.
Soft. Calm.
Barely a whisper. Alenia turned to see a woman she had long forgotten. Not powerful, not regal, just tired. This self had no title, no kingdom. She had walked away from the throne long ago. She knelt beside Alenia and took her hand. You're afraid, she said. Alenia didn't answer. You built the unity to protect yourself. You became one to escape being alone. But now you see. The woman gestured at the crumbling garden. You were never meant to be one thing. Alenia wept, not fire, not glass, but real, human tears. And whispered, I don't want to be alone again. The woman smiled. You won't be, if you let go. Chapter 33. Unbecoming. Outside the garden. Outside Alenia, the world shifted. The sky cracked open with 1,000 lights. The people of Eldenhold looked up and saw reflections returning to mirrors. Not copies. Not invaders. Possibilities. All the versions of themselves that had been erased were now returning, not to conquer, but to remind them who they could still be. Isolde stood atop the citadel, watching as the unity unraveled. She felt it, the power Alenia had hoarded dissolving like salt in rain. Then she saw her. Alenia, stumbling through the plaza, barefoot and broken, her crown fallen, her hair tangled, no longer glowing. Alone,
but not unloved.
Isolde descended the stairs. And for the first time in their entwined lives, of Varenthisma, she offered Alenia her hand. Of any tree, older than the kingdoms of men and gods, lies a cavern untouched by light. The Mirror Forge, where the first reflection was born, not as a trick of light, but as a weapon. Vaelreth had only heard whispers of it in his youth. Half-myths. Forbidden scrolls. His tutors had sealed the truth behind locked tones and warning sigils. But now, with Eldenhold unraveling and Alenia's grip crumbling, he had no choice. The key was in his blood. He descended alone, guided by a relic he once wore around his neck as a child, a mirror fragment no larger than a coin, etched with runes only visible under dying stars. Each step down into the forge peeled back his memories, not just his own, but those that never should have been his. He saw a boy crowned in a distant land, a traitor burned on a pyre made of his own regrets, a lover whose name he had never spoken aloud, and a mirror, not reflecting him, but judging him. Chapter 35. Reflections that bled. The forge itself pulsed like a heart of stone and steel. Massive mirrored slabs rose like monoliths, each one showing a different version of reality. In one, Vaelreth ruled beside Isolde. In another, he died at Alenia's hand. In another still, he never existed, replaced by a girl with eyes of starglass. He reached the center, where a forge smith once labored, a being older than time itself. There, atop the anvil of echoes, lay the prime shard, the source of all mirrored power. He reached for it, and the forge screamed, not aloud, but in his mind, a language of memory and regret. To take the shard is to know the first truth. You are not the forgotten prince. You are the mirror-born heir. The truth struck like thunder. He had never been born. He had been forged. Chapter 36. The Mirror-born Heir. Long ago, when the gods still walked among mortals, one among them grew afraid, not of death, but of being forgotten. This god, nameless and faceless, crafted the Mirror Forge to preserve memory as power, to reflect their will across all worlds. And they made Vaelreth, a vessel designed to hold echoes of kings, saints, and tyrants. A walking reflection meant to become the perfect ruler across every mirrored world. But he had broken free. Somehow, his soul had fractured just enough to become his own. Now, standing in the forge, with the prime shard in hand, he understood what he must do. He could remake himself, or he could shatter the forge and destroy all reflected control forever. Chapter 37. The Choice. As the forge trembled, Alenia's presence flickered. Even broken, her power still lingered in the mirrored realms. Her voice echoed faintly in the shards. You don't understand what you are, Vaelreth. You are hope. You are what I needed to fix everything. But another voice rose beside it. Isolde. Not as a queen, but as a girl who had once sat beside Vaelreth under a dying tree and whispered that freedom was worth any price. You were always more than what they made you. Tears ran down his face. He lifted the prime shard above the anvil and struck it down.
Once. Twice.
A third time, the shard shattered, and the mirror forge began to collapse. Chapter 38. The Shattering of the Mirror God. The moment the shard broke, something woke. A consciousness older than time. Not the god who forged mirrors, but the thing that had watched even that god with amusement. The mirror god, who had only one law: reflect or die. Now its law had been broken. The forge crumbled. The mirrored monolith split. Reality tore. And for the first time, the god looked into a mirror and saw nothing. It screamed. The sound rippled across all worlds. In Eldenhold, glass shattered in every street. In the sea of whispers, waves turned to steam. Even in the unworld, the bone tree cracked. And above it all, Isolde and Alenia looked up, feeling the tremor of a power neither had dared challenge. "He did it," Isolde whispered. Elenia smiled faintly as a single mirrored tear rolled down her cheek. He chose to be real. Chapter 39. Afterglow. Veilreth emerged from the rubble, wounded, weary, but free. No longer bound by reflections. He bore no crown, only scars. But in his wake came something new, realities no longer chained to a single mirrored fate. Children with new destinies. Cities with unknown futures. A world where choice, not symmetry, would guide what came next. The first true tomorrow. The sky had no color, no shape, just a blank expanse, like a thought never formed. It was here, at the end of all reflections, that Isolde and Elenia arrived. Not as rivals, not as god and queen, but as two women who had shaped 1,000 worlds between them, and who now faced the Worldbreaker. The threshold was made of stone that had never been mined, rising like teeth from a silent earth. Before them, the being stood, not a figure, not even a form, but a wound in reality. It bled questions. And when it spoke, the sound was not heard. It was remembered. "You would undo what I was made to uphold." Isolde stepped forward, sword drawn, mirror shard glowing faintly at her belt. "We would choose. Not reflect. Not merge. Choose." The Worldbreaker pulsed like a dying star. To choose is to shatter. To shatter is to suffer. To suffer is to remember you are not one. Elenia said nothing. For once, she did not command. She listened. Chapter 41. The Echo Bargain. The Worldbreaker unfurled part of its mind, and the Queen saw, not with eyes, but with memory. A world where Elenia became the sun, and all lived in her warmth, without pain, without hunger, but also without freedom. A world where Isolde died young, but her sacrifice birthed a religion of compassion that shaped an empire of peace. A world where Kale became king, but forgot every face he'd ever loved. A world where mirrors never existed, and humans never remembered what they lost. These were offers.
Paths.
The Worldbreaker whispered. "Choose one. Fix your world. Seal the mirrors. End this cycle." Isolde looked to Elenia. For once, her rival, her sister by pain, was not the answer. She was the question. Elenia's voice was soft. "I could rule again. I could make it right this time." Isolde touched her shoulder. "You could, but that's not freedom." The Worldbreaker waited, and for the first time in all of known existence, it was uncertain. Chapter 42. The Shard of Choice. From within Isolde's belt, the last living shard of the shattered mirror began to glow. Not silver, not glass, but fire. It had taken on her will, her grief, her rejection of unity. And now, It pulsed with a single purpose: to decide. But not by killing the world breaker, not by sealing the mirrors, by asking the world itself. Isolde turned to Alenia. "You are never my enemy," she said. "You were my reflection, my fear, my hope." Alenia nodded, tears lining her cracked cheek. "Then let's do this together." They raised the shard, and together they spoke. "Let the world choose." The shard shattered in their hands, and something new was born. Chapter 43. The Unglassing. Across the world, every mirror cracked, not with violence but with release. The reflections faded, not erased, not banished. Simply let go. In their place, truths emerged, real faces, real wounds, memories that belonged to no gods. In the streets of Eldenhold, people wept, not in fear, but in relief. Children who had never dreamed began to imagine. The last thorn tree shed its final petal, and the world breathed. For the first time since the Mirror God had whispered its law, no one was watching. Chapter 44. Queens Without Thrones. Isolde stood at the edge of the old citadel, not as a queen, not as a rebel, just Isolde. Alenia beside her, robes stained and torn, crown long discarded. They watched the people, no longer followers, no longer puppets,
Just people.
"What now?" Alenia asked. Isolde smiled. "Now they live." Kale emerged from the crowd, still haunted, still fractured, but smiling. Vaelreth joined them too, limping from the long path through the Mirror Forge. He carried no blade, only a book, blank pages waiting to be written. No more mirrors, no more gods, only choice. Epilogue. The Memoryless Dawn. There is a myth now, whispered among campfires and sung by wandering poets, of two queens who met the end of the world and refused it, of a mirror that asked not what you were, but what you could be, and of a people who, finally free of reflection, dared to cast their own shadows. There is no single truth, no one ending, only the question: who are you when no one is watching? The sky had no color, no shape, just a blank expanse, like a thought never formed. It was here, at the end of all reflections, that Isolde and Alenia arrived. Not as rivals, not as god and queen, but as two women who had shaped 1,000 worlds between them, and who now faced the Worldbreaker. The threshold was made of stone that had never been mined, rising like teeth from a silent earth. Before them, the being stood, not a figure, not even a form, but a wound in reality. It bled questions, and when it spoke, the sound was not heard. It was remembered. You would undo what I was made to uphold. Isolde stepped forward, sword drawn, mirror shard glowing faintly at her belt. We would choose. Not reflect. Not merge. Choose. The Worldbreaker pulsed like a dying star. To choose is to shatter. To shatter is to suffer. To suffer is to remember you are not one. Alenia said nothing. For once, she did not command. She listened. Chapter 41. The Echo Bargain. The Worldbreaker unfurled part of its mind, and the Queen saw. Not with eyes, but with memory. A world where Alenia became the sun, and all lived in her warmth, without pain, without hunger, but also without freedom. A world where a soul died young, but her sacrifice birthed a religion of compassion that shaped an empire of peace. A world where Kale became king, but forgot every face he'd ever loved. A world where mirrors never existed, and humans never remembered what they lost. These were offers.
Paths.
The Worldbreaker whispered. Choose one. Fix your world. Seal the mirrors. End this cycle. Isolde looked to Alenia. For once her rival, her sister by pain, was not the answer. She was the question. Alenia's voice was soft. I could rule again. I could make it right this time. Isolde touched her shoulder. You could, but that's not freedom. The Worldbreaker waited, and for the first time in all of known existence, it was uncertain. Chapter 42. The Shard of Choice. From within Isolde's belt, the last living shard of the shattered mirror began to glow. Not silver, not glass, but fire. It had taken on her will, her grief, her rejection of unity, and now it pulsed with a single purpose: to decide. But not by killing the Worldbreaker, not by sealing the mirrors, by asking the world itself. Isolde turned to Alenia. You were never my enemy, she said. You were my reflection, my fear, my hope. Alenia nodded, tears lining her cracked cheek. Then let's do this together. They raised the shard, and together they spoke. Let the world choose. The shard shattered in their hands, and something new was born. Chapter 43. The Unglassing. Across the world, every mirror cracked. Not with violence, but with release. The reflections faded. Not erased, not banished. Simply let go. In their place, truths emerged. Real faces. Real wounds. Memories that belonged to no gods. In the streets of Eldenhold, people wept, not in fear, but in relief. Children who had never dreamed began to imagine. The last thorn tree shed its final petal, and the world breathed. For the first time since the Mirror God had whispered its law. No one was watching. Chapter 44. Queens Without Thrones. Isolde stood at the edge of the old citadel. Not as a queen. Not as a rebel. Just Isolde. Alenia beside her, robes stained and torn, crown long discarded. They watched the people. No longer followers. No longer puppets.
Just people.
What now? Alenia asked. Isolde smiled. Now they live. Kale emerged from the crowd. Still haunted. Still fractured. But smiling. Vaelreth joined them too, limping from the long path through the Mirror Forge. He carried no blade. Only a book, blank pages waiting to be written. No more mirrors. No more gods. Only choice. Epilogue. The Memoryless Dawn. There is a myth now, whispered among campfires and sung by wandering poets, of two queens who met the end of the world and refused it, of a mirror that asked not what you were, but what you could be, and of a people who, finally free of reflection, dared to cast their own shadows. There is no single truth, no one ending, only the question, who are you, when no one is watching? They woke beneath a sky empty of stars. No constellations, no twin moons, only a vast, pulsing gray, like the skin of something sleeping above the world. Isolde rose first. The wind was sharp with salt and cinder, though no sea could be seen. Beside her, Alenia stirred, her once imperial robes reduced to rags, hair loose and silver in the pale morning. They had slept in the hollow of a tree older than time. They had not dreamed, because the sky did not allow it. Something's wrong, Isolde said. Alenia nodded, eyes narrowed. It's not finished. Chapter 2. The Child Without a Name. He was no more than 6 winters old. Hair like char, eyes like moons, one silver, one gold. They found him sitting alone in a field of ash flowers, humming a song that hadn't existed in any of their worlds. No shadow followed him, no reflection. And yet, he was not empty. He looked up at them and smiled. You broke the mirror, he said, as if greeting old friends. Isolde knelt. Who are you? The child tilted his head. Who do you want me to be? Alenia recoiled. No one had ever asked her that without already holding the answer. The child stood and touched Isolde's hand. And, in that moment, she saw it. The hollow sky. Not dead, not void, but waiting. Chapter 3. The Hollow Sky Breathes. When the mirror fell, when unity shattered, when the world breaker died, something else woke. Not a god, not a memory, but a potential, a mind,
A sky.
a womb. Now, the world beneath it was unshaped, and the hollow sky hung above like a silent parent waiting for its children to choose. But the problem was, some people didn't want freedom. Some wanted mirrors back. Chapter 4. The Echo Cult. At first they were wanderers, then whisperers, then knives in the dark. Calling themselves the Reflected, they believed the mirror had not imprisoned, but saved. That the chaos now was proof of error. That Alenia had been right to unify all things. That Isolde had stolen perfection. And they had a prophet, a man with no face, who wore a cloak of broken glass, and said he had seen the last mirror. They followed him. They hunted the child. They wanted to rebuild the mirror. Chapter 5. Kale of the Many. Kale walked the edge of all things. No longer fully present in one time, he slipped between selves. A king who ruled beside Isolde and betrayed her. A farmer who never met her. A killer. A martyr. A mirror. Each night, he returned to her. Each morning, he forgot her name. But the child remembered him. You're broken like me, the child said once. Kale laughed bitterly. I was never whole. Chapter 6. The Flame Beneath Stone. In the east, beneath the burned mountain, something stirred. Not divine, not reflective, but ancient. A remnant from the first world, before mirrors, before gods. A fire that had been buried by the mirror god to prevent creation beyond its control. Now it breathed, and a girl in a red cloak, a scavenger, found it. And it spoke to her. Build, it said. Not command, not reflect, but create. Chapter 7. The Map with No Names. Isolde, Alenia, Kale, and the child traveled through lands unfamiliar yet familiar, shapes of old kingdoms, but without memory to guide them. No roads, no maps, just stories whispered by people who no longer knew who they were before the mirrors fell. A place called Vestron, where people carved new names in stone. A river called 12-fold, where time moved sideways. A forest called the Stillness, where no one dared speak for fear of waking their own past. They moved between them, and behind them, the Reflected came. Chapter 8. First Blood. It happened at dusk. In a ruined chapel, beneath the hollow sky.
Knives.
Fire. The prophet in glass robes. They demanded the child. Isolde bled. Alenia broke 2 of them with her bare hands. Kale flickered between past and now, dying in each version, but never staying dead. And the child, he stood, watching, not afraid, until the prophet whispered, "You are the final key." Then the child's eyes changed. The silver burned away. The gold dimmed. And something ancient stepped through his small frame and said, "The sky remembers." They came to her in dreams made of mirrored bone. Not gods, not men,
but echoes of who she used to be.
Elenia stood atop a high tower of glass, her hands clean, her crown returned. Below, the world bowed in reverence, weeping not in sorrow, but relief. This was the dream the prophet offered. And Elenia, exhausted, bleeding, mortal once more, stood at the center of a real-world ruin, staring across a stone bridge as the prophet waited in silence. He was draped in his cloak of shattered reflections. Each piece gleamed faintly, showing images of the lives Elenia had ruled, crushed, and saved. His face was masked, faceless, but his voice rang like a song she once wrote for herself. "They still need you." Elenia didn't reply. She stepped closer. The wind whistled through dead trees. The sky remained empty. He extended his hand. "You see what's happening. This chaos, this collapse, all this freedom, they don't know what to do with it. But you do. You always did." She looked down. The hollow sky pulsed gently above them, as if watching, waiting. Elenia's voice was like gravel soaked in moonlight. "I know how to rule, but that's not the same as knowing what's right." The prophet moved no closer. "You were a queen of purpose, a goddess of order. You gave meaning to the meaningless. You can be that again. We can rebuild the mirror. A better one. Not control, but clarity. Not obedience, understanding." He took a final step forward and opened his arms. "Just take the child. Hand him to me. And you will have the world you were meant to shape." Chapter 10. The Weight of Memory. Elenia closed her eyes and saw herself on a golden throne, carving laws into living marble. Herself walking barefoot through a battlefield, touching the dying, taking their pain. Herself holding Isolde at the edge of a cliff, whispering, "You could rule with me." Herself alone, forgotten, weeping into the lap of a shattered statue that bore her face. "You say they need me," she said slowly. "But they never truly had me. They had the idea of me. They loved me because I made their choices disappear." She opened her eyes, and for the first time in her life, she did not want to be loved. She wanted to be true. The child is not a key. He is a question the world must answer itself. And I will not steal that choice again. The prophet paused. Then his voice turned dark. "So be it." And he summoned the mirror blade. Chapter 11. The Battle Beneath the Hollow. They fought in the ruins of the old observatory, a place that once watched stars, now reduced to dust and rust. The prophet's mirror blade was a weapon of pure reflection. It echoed her strikes before she made them. It countered her regrets. Elenia, once divine, now stood mortal, aching, bruised. And yet she held firm. She did not fight for dominion. She fought for the child. And for herself. And then, the shard Kale had left behind, dormant in her satchel since the mirror forge fell, began to glow. A memory. His voice, warm and human. "You don't need to be worshipped. Just remembered honestly." And from that memory, her hands ignited with living flame. Not magic, not mirror, but truth. The prophet lunged, shrieking. Elenia caught the mirror blade and snapped it in half. The cloak of glass fell away. The prophet collapsed, gasping. And she saw his face. It was hers. Chapter 12. The Reflection That Was Her. The prophet was a shard of Elenia, a fragment of the mirror's attempt to preserve her divine self. All her ambitions, all her certainty, all her belief that without her, the world would fall. He wept. "I only wanted to help." She knelt beside him, wiping his brow. "You did. You showed me what I almost became again." As he faded, he whispered, "If not you, who will lead them?" Elenia turned to the horizon and saw no one.
Just people.
Living, choosing, failing, loving. And she whispered back, "No one. That's the point." Chapter 13. The Fire and the Child. When she returned to the others, she found Isolde sitting beside the child, who was stacking stones silently, each one humming with a soft internal light. Kale was nearby, flickering, fading. One of his versions had died that morning. Another would die by dusk. Elenia looked to the child, and he smiled at her. Not with reverence, not with fear, but with trust. She knelt beside him and took his hand. "The prophet is gone. The mirrors are done. What do we do now?" The child looked to the hollow sky and said, "We build a world